but not while I was here. I think that mindset, in some ways, is what's at the heart of the fear, the despair, the hope against hope. It's certainly at the heart of some of what I would describe as immoral, but equally as immoral, they were insane decisions that were made in the context of the budget last year. The idea of cutting a couple of million out of the education of small traveller children, for example. How anyone in their right mind at a policy level would not want to see traveller children transitioning into primary and secondary school baffles me. But for some reason, when money had to be saved, it was the first place they went. There are two stories, and I don't want to delay you, two illustrations perhaps, that I think sum up the mindset. See, I always believed, as somebody, long before I worked in Barnardo's, as somebody who was involved in disability in a whole variety of ways, again, many of those ways were reluctant, I always believed that there was one right that every child and young person had in Ireland, an absolute, unfettered right, the only one, set out in our Constitution. There is no other, and that is the right to an education. It's set out there as clear as day, and in language that is simple and direct. At least it was until a young autistic man called Jamie Sinnott went to the High Court and got a judgment saying that he had a right to education for as long as he needed it. He got a judgment from the High Court saying that. And the Department of Education and the Attorney General and the government decided couldn't be right. And they appealed it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court issued a judgment, always known as the Sinnott judgment, which overturned the High Court judgment that Jamie Sinnott had got, and which said the right to education exists between the ages of 3 or 4 and the ages of 18. It does not exist outside that period of time. And it was argued by the department in front of the Supreme Court that if they allowed a right to continue on an unfettered basis, there'd be all sorts of chancers and malingerers who had wasted their years in education coming back and demanding access to education in their adulthood. And naturally, we couldn't have that. The Supreme Court issued a judgment by very substantial majority. Only one judge, Catherine McGuinness, voted against it. But even some of those judges who voted for the majority said that they wanted to be very careful to record the fact that they regarded Ireland's constitution as being a constitution for the development of a society. The dissenting voice in that respect was one judge, Judge Hardiman, who said that Ireland's constitution was every bit as much a document which was designed to regulate our economy and to recognise the fact that Ireland was made up of taxpayers and people who had to make decisions about scarce resources and so on. And the consequence of that judgment was that what everyone believed to be an unfettered right to education disappeared. And nobody, I think, was really terribly pleased, except, unfortunately, the Department of Education. And they've developed that whole position into a policy. And that policy was challenged in a recent judgment by the Equality Authority. I don't know if any of you have come across this, but it's there to be found on the Equality Authority's Tribunal's website. It's a case that concerned 2 siblings, twins, a boy and his twin sister, who are going to school. The boy has an intellectual disability. His twin sister doesn't. And the boy was told that he had to get his Leaving Cert because he was determined to get his Leaving Cert, had to get his Leaving Cert by the age of 18. And he had to jump classes to do it, which meant that a boy with a lot of barriers to get over, a lot of hurdles to climb, had a few more added to him by the system. And the reason he had to complete his education, get his leaving cert by the age of 18, was that funding stops at 18. His right to an education ends at 18. His sister, who didn't jump, completed her leaving cert at 19, applied to the CEO, and was graciously awarded points and got a funded education, and hopefully and thankfully is still in that education and will be there at least until she's 23 with the support of the Department of Education. The Department of Education was asked in the course of this case why they would take a view that a boy with more barriers to climb should be ordered to climb them quicker. And they constructed a case which is worth reading. I remember thinking at the time that I don't think Homer Simpson would have written an argument as well as this. They started off by saying this case shouldn't have been brought in the first place because the Department of Education is not an education provider, which kind of flies in the face of the first sentence in their mission statement, which says the mission of this department is to provide high-quality education, but they're not, apparently, an education provider. And the reason they're not an education provider is that their real role is to provide for high-quality education and not to provide high-quality education. There were a lot of other arguments, but the clincher for the department was that if they didn't get this boy out of school at the age of 18, he'd be blocking a place for somebody, maybe even somebody with a disability, at the other end of the system. We're never going to make headway in relation to lifelong learning until we confront a mindset. And it is a mindset that defines education in totally rigorous terms, that prevents the key government agency from involving itself in preschool education. I mean, there is no other jurisdiction, I suspect, in the world where the Department of Education is not involved, even at the level of standards in preschool education. I think we're probably the only jurisdiction where that happens. For as long as our Department of Education and our legal system defines education as being the preserve of people between the ages of 4 and 18 who are prepared to sit in neat rows in front of teachers in well-organised classrooms, lifelong education is going to be left up to the rest of us. So if you really want to challenge something, challenge that. Thank you very much indeed.